will discuss INICET recall questions of 2020. This year, the question paper was a little bit lengthy, but there was a lot of repeats. These lot of repeats, you must focus that any paper would any day be roughly 70 to 80% repeat, and rest of the paper would be new questions. But those repeat questions also require a lot of conceptual thinking. You must have your concepts clear. If you have your concepts clear, even a new question that has been framed will not be a problem. These are recall questions, so these are most likely the questions that have come, and any discrepancy is to be forgiven. The first question, which of the following does not form framework of larynx? A, B, C, D. A is epiglottis, B is hyoid, C is thyroid, and D is cricoid. The laryngeal framework is formed by 3 paired cartilages and 3 unpaired cartilages. The paired cartilages are arytenoid, cuneiform, and corniculate. The unpaired cartilages are epiglottis, thyroid, and cricoid. So, the answer is B, that is hyoid. It does not form the framework of the larynx. Also, other questions that are asked is, which is the leaf shaped cartilage of larynx? The answer is epiglottis, which forms a leaf like structure. Which is the butterfly shaped or a shield like cartilage? Then the answer is thyroid. And which is a ring shaped cartilage? Then the answer is cricoid. These are the important unpaired cartilages that form the framework of the larynx. Cricoid is a signet ring shaped, and it has anteriorly broader part, posteriorly a less broader part, and cricoid cartilage is the only complete ring that is present. The tracheal rings are present only anteriorly, and the posterior part is the membranous part. Another question that is often asked from the larynx is, which is the narrowest part of an adult larynx? The answer is glottis. And which is the narrowest part in the children? Then the answer is subglottis. Other parts that form the framework of the larynx are the muscles. The muscles can be intrinsic or extrinsic, and there are various ligaments that connect. This is the thyrohyoid ligament. This is the cricothyroid membrane. This is the thyrohyoid membrane, and this is the median thyrohyoid ligament. The superior laryngeal vessels and the superior laryngeal nerve, it pierces the thyrohyoid membrane. It then enters into the substance. Superior laryngeal nerve gives rise to an external branch and an internal branch. The external branch supplies the cricothyroid muscle. The internal branch is a sensory nerve that supplies the mucosa of the supraglottis, and it supplies the mucosa of the PFS, pyriform sinus. Which nerve is responsible for the referred otalgia from growths in the PFS? Then the answer is internal laryngeal nerve of the superior laryngeal nerve. Answer can either be superior laryngeal nerve, or it can be internal laryngeal nerve of the superior laryngeal nerve, or it can be simply vagus. Recurrent laryngeal nerve passes through the cricothyroid joint, and it supplies all the muscles, all the intrinsic muscles of the larynx except cricothyroid, which is supplied by the external branch of the superior laryngeal nerve. And the blood supply is through the superior laryngeal blood vessels, which are supplied from the superior thyroid artery. This is one diagram that you need to remember while in connection to the larynx. In this is the epiglottis, the leaf shaped structure. This is the quadrangular membrane which joins the free edge of the epiglottis and joins and forms the false vocal cord and attaches to the arytenoid posteriorly. This is the conus elasticus which attaches to the vocal ligament, and this in turn attaches to the cricoid cartilage. These are membranes that prevent the spread of carcinomas into the other spaces. This is a paraglottic space. Paraglottic. This is the glottis. True vocal cord level is called as the glottis. This is the supraglottis and this is the subglottis. Vocal cord free edge and up to 1 centimeter below the vocal cord and till the cricoid cartilage, it forms the subglottis. This space is the paraglottic space. This communicates with the pre-epiglottic space and thus helps in extension of the carcinoma. Rinky space is a potential space that is present in the submucosal level. The various layers of larynx can be, this is the mucosa, this is a stratified epithelium, this is the superficial layer of the lamina propria, this is the intermediate and the deep layer of the lamina propria. These two form the vocal ligament. The vocal ligament is formed by the intermediate and deep layer of the lamina propria, and this is the vocalis muscle, and this is also called as thyroarytenoid. Thyroarytenoid and posterior cricoarytenoid is the only abductor of the larynx of the vocal cord, and thyroarytenoid and lateral cricoarytenoid. You have to remember it by talc. Thyroarytenoid and lateral cricoarytenoid, they are the adductors of the vocal cord. So, this is one important question. The other important question is the recurrent laryngeal nerve supplies all nerves except the cricothyroid. The external branch of the superior laryngeal nerve, it supplies the cricothyroid muscle. And this is the subclassification of larynx into the supraglottis, the glottis and the subglottis. Glottis is the narrowest part in an adult larynx and subglottis is the narrowest part in a pediatric larynx. This is how larynx glottis looks like. This is the vocal cord. This is the membranous part. This is the fibrous part. This is responsible for phonation and this is responsible for respiration. This attaches to the arytenoid. This is the epiglottis. Anterior commissure attaches to the thyroid cartilage through Broyles ligament. And all the benign lesions such as vocal cord polyp, vocal cord nodule, vocal cord cyst, they form on the membranous part of the free edge of the vocal cord. They are generally present in the anterior 1/3 and posterior 2/3 of the vocal cord because that is the area of maximum friction while phonation. When we speak, the epiglottis falls because of contraction of the airy epiglottic fold. This is arytenoid, this is epiglottis, this is the airy epiglottic fold. This is the false cord and this is the true cord. So, the three levels to prevent aspiration are the airy epiglottic fold leading to the prolapse of the epiglottis, the false vocal cord and the true vocal cord. Which of the following is sequence of auditory pathway? This looks like a complicated question. Superior olivary nucleus, going to the lateral lemniscus, going to the inferior colliculi, going to the medial geniculate ganglion. The next option is superior olivary nucleus, going to the inferior colliculi, going to the lateral lemniscus and going to the medial geniculate. This is inferior colliculus going to the olivary nucleus, going to the lateral lemniscus to the medial geniculate, and this is inferior colliculi going to the superior olivary nucleus, going to the medial geniculate ganglion and the lateral lemniscus. So, you write down all these options like this and then you remember that the pathway of auditory pathway is remembered by the mnemonic of E. coli ma. So, which of the following matches this? This is O-L-I-M, E. coli ma, and the answer is superior olivary nucleus going to the lateral lemniscus, going to the inferior colliculi and the medial geniculate ganglion. The mnemonic is E. coli ma. E. coli ma stands for 8th nerve. 8th nerve attaches to the dorsal and the ventral cochlear nucleus. The cochlear nucleus then provides information to the superior olivary complex. Then it goes to the nucleus of the lateral lemniscus, which in turn attaches to the inferior colliculus, which in turn attaches to the medial geniculate body and finally the auditory cortex. This is the arrangement of the auditory neural pathway. If you are asked about the Bera waves, then the mnemonic is E. coli ma. The waves of Bera are arranged according to this. The given X-ray is for frontal sinus. What view is this? This is the frontal sinus. This is the septum. This is the septum. This is the frontal sinus. This is the orbit. This is the maxillary sinus. And this is the oral cavity. This is the maxillary sinus. So, which view is this? The answer is Calville view. The Calville-Luck view is done for frontal sinus. Even if you do not understand what view this is, if it is given for the frontal sinus, then the answer is Calville's view. If it is given for the maxillary sinus, then the answer is Waters view. Waters view is done, it is the occipital view, it is done to visualize the maxillary sinus. Calville view gives the frontal sinus the best. This is a patient of DNS. DNS is deviated nasal septum. Identify the structure pointed at. This is the deviated nasal septum. We have to identify this structure. And this structure is the middle turbinate. This structure, is it septum? Is this inferior turbinate? Is this middle turbinate or is it uncinate? The answer is inferior turbinate. If they had pointed to this, this would have been the septum. If they pointed to this, this is the inferior turbinate and this is the middle turbinate. Generally on an anterior rhinoscopy, the most prominently visible are the inferior turbinate and the septum. Middle turbinate can sometimes be visualized. Uncinate process is difficult to visualize on an anterior rhinoscopy. But if you use an endoscope and sometimes they give an endoscopic view of the nose, then endoscopic view of the nose, you must also know the structures that are visible. This is the first pass. The first pass is when the endoscope is passed through the floor of the nose and the structures are visualized along the floor of the nose. You can visualize the right choana in which the nasopharynx can be seen, the torus tuberous, the eustachian tube orifice. This is the torus tuberous, this is the eustachian tube orifice, this is the middle turbinate and this is the inferior turbinate, and this is a septum. This is how the picture will look like. This is how you have to remember that posteriorly the torus tuberous, the eustachian tube orifice, and this is the fossa of Rosenmiller. This is where the carcinoma of nasopharynx origin from. You can use a 0-degree telescope. The 0-degree telescope will give such a view. You can use other 70-degree, 30-degree or 45-degree telescope, but they will give differential views. Usually a 4 mm endoscope is used. This is also called as a Hopkins rod. In pediatric, the Hopkins rod is 2.7 millimeter because the diameter needs to be smaller. Second pass, this is medial to the middle turbinate. In this, you ascend towards the nasal cavity and then you visualize the medial to the middle turbinate, and you see that you can visualize the sphenoid sinus ostia and the anterior fossa of the sphenoid sinus. You have to, in the last picture we saw that it was going in the floor. This picture, it goes roughly 1 to 1.5 centimeter above the choana, and this is where the sphenoid sinus ostia is visualized. It is roughly 7 centimeter from here. This is how an endoscopic picture will look like, and this is how a schematic diagram looks like. So, if you are asked to identify the structure, this is the middle turbinate, this is the sphenoid and this is the septum. Third pass, when we go lateral to the middle turbinate, then that is we go into the middle meatus. Into the middle meatus you will see the openings. It is difficult to visualize the openings, but there are openings of ethmoid sinus, frontal sinus, maxillary sinus into the middle meatus. They join through the hiatus semilunaris. Hiatus semilunaris is a (2D) structure where the sinuses drain. Then you go into the third pass. This is the middle turbinate, this is the ethmoidal bulla, and this is the uncinate. And this is how the structure looks like. You have to go a little more up. Next, this is an important question. A lot of times, a lot of questions on CSOM and its complications are asked. They can be framed differently according to the age of the patient, according to pathways of spread, according to the name of the complication. Complications is a very favorite topic of question paper. So, which of the following are features of complications of CSOM? Grisinger sign, dissolved abscess, delta sign and Hitzelberger sign. What is Grisinger sign? Grisinger sign is when due to mastoid emissary veins thrombosis. This is present in lateral sinus thrombosis. If the mastoid emissary veins also get thrombosed, then in the post-auricular area you will find some tenderness or redness. Bisol's abscess. Bisol's abscess is the abscess that is present near the sternocleidomastoid. This is also present because of mastoiditis. Delta sign. Delta sign is a complication of, is a sign in lateral sinus thrombosis. And Hitzelberger sign, this is due to involvement or compression of the facial nerve, and this is hypoesthesia of the posterior superior canal wall of the external auditory canal, and this is present in acoustic neuroma. So, we say that this and this is a complication of CSOM, but this is not a complication of CSOM, this is present in acoustic neuroma. So, what is the correct answer? Is it A, B, C? Is it B, C, D? Or is it A, C, D? Or all of the above? So, the answer we know is A, B, C. this is, if these photographs are given, then this is a photograph of a mastoid abscess. Post-auricular or mastoid abscess is the most common complication of any mastoid, of any CSOM, and this is the most common of all the abscesses that are formed. This is the Bizold's abscess, which is formed at the upper border of the sternocleidomastoid, and there is erythema near the mastoid. This is a battle sign. This is present in, this is not to be confused with a sign of CSOM. Even though it is present posterior to the ear, it is not a sign of complication of the CSOM. It is a complication of fracture of skull base. This can lead to CSF otorrhea or CSF rhinorrhea. This is the delta sign. Delta sign is that there is thrombosis is present and all along it some blood is flowing through it. This is the delta sign. So this is a complication of the lateral sinus thrombosis. This is a complication of an abscess that is formed by CSOM, and this is post-auricular abscess or mastoiditis. This can also give the smooth appearance and a bright red appearance, and this is a battle sign. We have to talk about the various pathways of spread of complications of CSOM, which is a very important question, and that is how you determine that how the infection spreads and what are the various complications that can result from it. This is the diagram of the ear. The external ear, it connects to the external auditory canal, it connects to the tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane connects to the malleus, malleus connects to the incus, and incus connects to the stapes. The stapes is in turn connected to the oval window. Oval window is connected to the scala vestibuli. This is the scala tympani, and this is the round window, and this is the scala media. The scala media contains the endolimb. This is called as the membranous cochlear duct, and this is the perilimb. It is present between the bony and the membranous portion. Similarly, this is the endolimb which is present in the membranous labyrinth, and the perilymph is present between the bony and the membranous labyrinth. This area connects to the cochlear aqueduct to the CSF and the subarachnoid space. This is where it leads to complications. So, the most common cause of or the most common route of spread of infection from the ear to the brain is through the cochlear aqueduct. The question can be framed in any way. What is the feature that is present that leads to spread of infection from the ear to the brain, and this is the endolymphatic duct. Also, since the infection can travel from the ear to the brain, the intracranial complications are extradural abscess. You have to remember the layers of the brain. You have to, this is the dura, then the arachnoid, and the pia. So, it can be extradural, it can be subdural, it can be subarachnoid, it can be brain abscesses, or it can be just inflammation of the meninges, and then that can lead to meningitis. Different complications will have different clinical presentations. In the complications of the mastoid, the patient can have facial nerve palsy, patient can have labyrinthitis, patient can have petrositis, and patient can have mastoiditis. You also have to remember that mastoiditis and Bizold's abscess and Sitelli's abscess, these are abscesses that are present outside the temporal bone. Which of the following are objective tests of hearing? Brain evoked response audiometry, OAE, pure tone audiometry, and tympanometry. Autoacoustic emission is OAE. So, what are the objective tests? The tests of hearing can be divided into objective tests and subjective tests. Subjective tests are when the response is to be elicited by the patient himself, and any response that the patient gives is likely to influence the overall result. So, pure tone audiometry is a subjective test. In this, the patient is asked to hear the noise, both air conduction and bone conduction, and then the patient is asked to tell as to when can the patient hear the sound. This is the most common test that is used to assess the hearing, but this has its own fallacies. Patients who are malingering, patients who have mental retardation, patients who are sick and cannot give responses, you cannot use pure tone audiometry in those patients. If you want to give a disability certificate, then pure tone audiometry cannot be used for that alone. Then the objective tests are BERA, OAE, tympanometry. So, the answer here will be A, B and D. In BERA, as we already discussed, the waves are by E. E. Colima. If you are asked the various waves and the various structures that are responsible, then you can answer the question by this mnemonic. Autoacoustic emissions are generally generated by the O and O outer hair cell. This is a very frequently asked question. It can also be used for ototoxicity, and these are all O's, which makes it easier to remember. Then tympanometry. Tympanometry has a lot of clinical implications. The type of graph, it can help you in determining the type of middle ear pathology. It basically tests about the middle ear pathology, how the pressure that is generated in the external auditory canal gets equilibrated through the middle ear. So, the various curves that you need to remember are A, AS, AD, B and C. A is the normal. AS is present in S as in otosclerosis. D is present in disruption. Disruption of the ossicular chain. B is a flat tympanogram which is present in otitis media with effusion, and C is when there is negative pressure or in eustachian tube dysfunction. If you see the graph, this is A, this is AS, this is AD, this is B and this is C. So, if just the graph is given, then you can actually analyze as to what condition the patient has. A lot of time the question, especially in otosclerosis, is framed: a patient, a young female after pregnancy developed hearing loss, and the following audiometry or the following tympanogram is given. So, what is the diagnosis? And then the diagnosis is otosclerosis, or sometimes AS is already given and then the graph is given. Just if you see AS, even though you do not understand the graph, you can understand that the patient answer is otosclerosis. AD is disruption of the ossicular chain. Sometimes the question is asked if the patient met with an accident and after accident the patient has hearing loss and a tympanometry was done, what will be the result? Then the answer will be AD. OME is a very frequent question that is asked in different ways. It is asked that the patient has adenoids, the patient is a mouth breather, is a snorer, has recurrent URI, the patient has eustachian tube dysfunction, the patient has nasal polyposis, the patient has any nasal cavity pathology that leads to obstruction of the eustachian tube and that leads to fluid being deposited in the middle ear, then that will lead to B-type curve. A lot of times a unilateral B-type curve is pathognomic of a nasopharyngeal carcinoma in an adult patient. And C is any eustachian tube dysfunction can lead to a negative pressure. You must understand that the questions that are framed, and the person who's setting up the exam is not trying to make you feel weird. He's just trying to test how much you can apply your mind. So you need to be very clear with your concepts, you need to be very concise and crisp with your concepts, and know that if just by looking at the clinical presentation you can know what the patient disease the patient has, you can interpret the answer accordingly. Thank you.